Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review Joe Bell. And this is a biographical film based off of the life of a very specific point in this specific man's life, Joe Bell, whose son committed suicide, and he goes on a walk across America from Oregon and walking across to New York City to do talks with people about bullying. And this film is starring Mark Wahlberg as Joe Bell. Reed Miller plays his son Jaden, and throughout Joe's walking across America, he sees visions of his son being there with him as he's walking through. And this film is directed by Reinaldo Marcus Green, who previously did Monsters and Men, and is going to be doing King Richard, which comes out this year, with Will Smith in it, about the Williams sisters' father. And this film takes a much glossier and softer look at hate crimes against young gay kids and of suicide. And it's a tough thing to process, because I've seen a lot of people be like, this is the gay Green Book movie, where it's like, let's take a very tough topic, oversimplify it to try to get messages across to general audiences, but, you kind of watered down the messaging of something that is really complicated and something that is very potent. And it's no longer so potent when you try to oversimplify it, and that's one thing that this film definitely does. And the thinking about this film, it's beautifully directed, first of all. It looks great, the cinematography is great, there's beautiful shots of all the landscape as Joe Bell is going across the country, and there's very poignant sequences, very poignant shots that really evoke a lot of emotion. Whether it's shaking hands on the chains of a swing set, or, Jaden's getting bullied in the bathroom, and at some point the camera just turns to his perspective and all these faces yelling in his face. And it's overwhelming, it's scary, and those kinds of things really work in the film, because the direction is quality direction. From a storytelling perspective, it's very muddled, because you have this nonlinear storytelling, and you have something being done in the first half of the film that disappears in the second half of the film during, the current timeline. And then you keep cutting back to flashbacks that bring up these emotional beats that really work. The emotional beats work in the scenes that's happening because the performances and the direction. And I'll get to that in a minute more, but they're not really building up properly and feeling completely earned in that moment, because the story feels so muddled in terms of how it's outlaying the film. It felt like this is the kind of film that didn't need the nonlinear storytelling. If they set it up linearly, I felt like this progress of the story would have flowed more. It would have brought us to the emotional beats that we needed to at the more specific times that it should have happened. And what really happens is they oversimplify events. They have one-dimensional characters and caricatures doing all these things to try to set up these sequences so that we can have these very specific lines and scenes done to set off this messaging. And the messaging is watered down. It's not as complex as it is in real life, which could be potentially dangerous trying to deal with these kinds of things based off of this perspective that you get from this film, because it never really does it in a deep and meaningful way, even though there are some very traumatic and emotional sequences. One thing that's really bad is the trailer seemingly gives away something. Like, it didn't seem like it was giving away anything when you watch the trailer, because you're like, oh, this is what happens. But then you watch the film and they try to build up this specific thing as like a mystery and like a shock halfway through the film. But you're like, this was easily given away in the trailer. So I don't get what they're trying to accomplish here. So there's some mismessaging here in terms of what's supposed to be something that we're supposed to understand and know right now. And it all feels very muddled. And in general, I felt like it would have benefited from more linear storytelling. And then like the third act of this film feels very, very overly structured and overly produced. Like Joe Bell meets a very specific character played by an actor I didn't realize was in the film, so I'm not going to give it away. It was an interesting turn of events, but it feels so perfect at a very specific moment that works so perfectly that it felt like I was 100% watching a movie, because nothing like this would actually happen. And when you have stuff like that, it does take you out of the drama, because you're just like, could this have happened so perfectly? And then something even more tragic happens as the film goes on, and you're just like, wait, what? So narratively and thematically, I feel like this is very muddled and doesn't quite accomplish what it needs to do. Then you have the performances, and Mark Wahlberg gives a really emotional and powerful performance, despite the fact that he has a really inconsistent accent in this film. He is raw, he is charged. There's one scene when he's in his truck that's really tragic, and his other son comes into the truck to confront him, and it's really sad. And you have Connie Britton playing his wife, who has some really powerful emotional moments, but they really dumbed down her character to just be like this conflict for her husband. And it's a shame, because she shows in the film that she could do much better than that and would do so much more than that. But the real star is Reed Miller, who's fantastic in this film. He's a revelation, and I only wish that he was in a film that did his character more justice and the messaging that is attached to his character more justice. This young gay man who takes his own life deserves so much more than what's done in this film that feels so easily glossed over and just be like tied up in a cute little bow. But it doesn't really work that way, and this situation is so much more complicated than that. And it only hints at confronting these more complex ideas, like one particular reaction to a kid leaving a letter on their son's grave who apologizes, and how you process that. There's some complexity between Britton and Wahlberg in that scene, but not enough complexity was brought into this. Everything seems so perfectly manipulated to try to hit on exactly how they want you to feel at every moment, and for us to be able to figure out these messagings despite the fact that it's a lot more complicated. And in the end, I feel like this film is really means well and attempts to mean well, but is just misguided and doesn't really hit the level that it really needs to, despite having some strong performances and really emotional sequences that do hit hard. I don't know if I would 100% recommend this. I feel like there's other films that deal with these things in a more mature and more complex and fleshed out way. So, like from a film, it'll take you on an emotional ride with some strong performances. But from the messaging of the film, I don't know if this is the best film to be taking in the messaging from. But those are my thoughts on Joe Bell. Let me know what you think, and let's talk some movies. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.